Hi, I'm Lois Kelly, and welcome to the Agile Uprising podcast.
Greetings and welcome to another edition of the Agile Uprising podcast, coming to you not live on Boxing Day 2019. I'm your host, Jay Hrcsko. Joined with me is Chris Murman.
Thankfully back in Texas from a trip to PA.
Andrew Leff.
Merry Christmas.
And Mr. James Gifford.
Howdy, y'all.
And the topic of this evening's episode is hiring Agile coaches. So some of us have interviewed for jobs. Some of us have been involved in hiring other coaches. And the more conversations that we have lately, we come to find that there is a long-running thread of how do I know I'm getting a quality coach? How do I tailor my interview topics, questions to a different level of coach? So we're going to try and unpack that and come up with some tips. All right, so let's dive right in. So first I'm going to go around the horn. Murman, have you ever, I know what your resume looks like, but I'm going to ask this question. Have you ever officially interviewed for an Agile coaching position?
Yes, I have interviewed for an Agile coaching position a couple of times, but I've never been the one interviewing a coach for a position. So,
okay. And that was going to be my next question. Okay.
Yeah, only on the receiving end.
Andrew, same question.
Yeah, so I've done both. I've interviewed a ton for Agile coaching roles, as well as have interviewed some coaches. It's always interesting to be on both sides.
And Mr. Gifford, same question.
Yeah, I've gone both ways, considering I've been bouncing between full-time and consulting. So,
and James, would you say you've done more interviewing to hire than you have yourself interviewing for a job?
Well, no. I mean, there was the year I did 200 interviews myself just to see how screwed up companies were and what their Agile implementations were. I literally took every single interview I could humanly get.
Oh, wow, you've interviewed more than Leff has. Leff changes underwear less than he interviews for coaching gigs.
Very true. Very true.
We should all interview.
Oh, that's a whole. That's
like,
a whole.
No,
yeah.
All right, tell them your philosophy, Drew. This is a good tip for listeners out there.
So I tend to like to try and interview twice a month to stay sharp and also understand what questions are being asked in the market and what companies are looking for. So it's a good way to get data as well.
It's also good practice, I think, because you're not only learning what questions are being asked, but just keep getting your reps in. Because I know that when my last job, I was there longer than I normally average. And when I had to go out and interview next, it was a little bit daunting to get back in the swing of things. But anyway, let's get back. Go on, Murman.
No. We'll get into it. I have a much different take, but I like that we're coming out from different positions.
Perfect. Good. So let's set the stage. So now I'm going to start off with an easy question. So resumes. The first step in any interview process is we get bombarded with resumes. So I'm going to go around a horn and ask you guys, is there a particular tip you would offer people? Is there something that you look at as a clue that says, okay, this guy's legit, this woman is legit, or maybe this person has inflated their resume a bit and they're not talking, they're talking the talk but not walking the walk. And I'm going to start with you, Mr. Andrew Leff. Any resume hints, tips, things that jump out at you that make you say, whoa?
This is, I feel like I'm never sure where to fall in the resume thing, because people are like, oh, it should be short. Mine's fairly long, and I get a lot of feedback on my resume and a lot of hits. So I have like a lot of information in there that really explains the story of my career progression. So if you read through my resume, it falls very much in the timeline that presents how I got to where I'm, currently positioned. So I think it has to tell the story of good enough sound bites, but not so vague, right? Like increased sales. Okay, well, what did you increase sales for? How did you increase sales? How much of the sales did you increase? So without some details in there, I feel like you need to have details in there that can help tell the story of you.
And is there ever something that you've seen when you've had someone else's resume come across your desk that makes you say, oh, this guy's definitely full of it? Or this person is definitely, you can tell by the wording or phrasing. Is there anything that you would offer up as a red flag that says, oh, hold on, this might go in the no thank you pile?
Yeah, I mean, I guess if your progression is like, I was working in a bakery and then I was working as a Uber driver and then I was an Agile coach. Yeah, that might raise a red flag for me.
I actually think I hired that person. But anyway, Murman, same question.
So I really like what Drew said. I think my only nuanced take on what he said is I would be interested to know how have they been on teams before, like what other roles have they been. Kind of like what Drew was saying is part of the progression is what was their entry into a team. I know that you can do more than just software, but by and large, for the most part, our listeners are going to be working in the software field. So I'm, my entry into IT was through QA, and so QA and then product manager, product owner, scrum master, whatever. Like, what have they actually done? Have they written code before? Have they, and so, yeah, I'm interested in that. And yes, to Drew's very well put point, if they've gone to just random things and all of a sudden they show up as a coach, I'm kind of dubious, right?
Okay. James.
I mean, I get turned off by the copious amounts of certifications that people have. Doesn't mean that I won't look at your resume, but if I see and then I look I go try to trace back through where you've been, what you've been doing, and if you're a big consulting company, I would expect you to by default have to have your SPC or some safe certification. So I do at least go back through your lineage. But when you show up with like Management 3.0, half of the IC Agile stuff, all 5 levels of Scrum certifications, and your resume looks like, or that one LinkedIn guy Troy put up, I tend to get turned off. I also like to do find words in your resume and see how many times you put the word Scrum in your resume, just as a guiding light of, man, why this guy's got Scrum once in his resume yet he says he's an Agile coach. So
you segued nicely into my next question, was certificates, right? We all know in the days of shirts and certs, these things are somewhat important. Do they matter? Do they not matter? Are there some that look better than others? I mean, Gifford, you just made the point that if you're coming from one of the big consulting firms, right, you expect someone to have an SPC, at least some safe background. I'm going to ask you, Murman, have you do you find that if it's overloaded, it's almost like, yeah, this is kind of fishy, or is there a couple that you would say, yeah, I definitely want to look for this to even bring you in the door? Do certs play into or do certifications not play into your decision making at all? What do you think?
So I'm sure that the right answer is somewhere in the three bears kind of a thing, where it's you don't want no certs and you don't want too many certs. You want something right in the middle. I'm sure that's kind of the right answer. But I mean, honestly, I don't give a crap. Like, the more the better. If I'm either they work for companies that gave them a training budget, which great for those companies, or they invested money in themselves to get. And so what if they've only been doing it a couple of years and they have 8 certs, right? Like, maybe they just don't have a life and they spend tons of their spare time and they really learn, right? I think that it's necessary. Unfortunately, certs have become a commodity in our industry. I am constantly being encouraged to get more as I go, not just by the community in general, but also by peers that work with these organizations, or my company is encouraged. I mean, our company encourages us to do it because those are the people that the more letters you have after your name, the more they're willing to pay for you. It is what it is.
Good point. Leff, your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I feel almost it's becoming the market has swung in a weird way where you're almost penalized for having these certs in a way where it's like looked at as just bad. But I can see that the certification market has been so watered down as far as I can go, take my CSM and in 2 days, I'm a certified Scrum Master with 0 Scrum experience, right? Let's just say you're right off the street. So does that really make you a Scrum Master? Or you could say that, hey, I went for 4 days and I got my SPC, and I've never done Agile. Now, granted, hopefully the testing and certification process would weed a good portion of those out. But if you're smart, you can take the test, and if you test well, you can pass, and hey, you got your cert. So it's hard to say. I think responsibly, we should have to have experience to obtain those certifications. But I like to see people that invest the time and effort to go get certified if they can back it up, right? Like, I'm not going to hire someone that just took their CSM and has no Agile experience. Or I might hire them knowing that they're probably going to have to learn quite a bit. So there's going to be a lot of time spent with them. So I guess it depends on what you're looking for and what you're willing to teach and what you're willing to expect to have walk in the door. So certifications, to me, I think they're important, but I think it's also important to have the experience to back up the ability to utilize that certification.
That's a good point. Go on, Leff. Murman, go on, Murman.
Yeah, so I just want to say to Drew's point of you're sometimes looked at crossways for having too many letters after your name, but I guess what I would ask all of us that are listening right now, like steam coming out of their ears at what I'm saying about this, like, it's relative. What you think is too many certs is not very many to someone else. For someone who's an independent consultant that teaches a lot of courses, that's it's almost imperative that you have all those letters after your name, because they're credentials in the organization. When I interviewed at ThoughtWorks, and for the record, this is not a dig on ThoughtWorks, because it's an amazing company and I love my time there. But when I interviewed there, I had 3 certs from the Scrum Alliance at the time. That's all it is. My Scrum Master, my PO, and my CSP. That's all I had at the time. That's not a lot of certs, relatively speaking. And when I interviewed with a guy, he goes, "Man, you sure do have a lot of certifications. What's that about?" And I was like, "Really?" Because my friends have like 3 times the number of certs that I do. So whatever you think that number is, trust me, someone has more. And maybe that just means they have a greater breadth of knowledge. I don't know. I just think we're throwing stones from glass houses on this. Sorry.
You're very true. No, you're right. You're right. And I think we're all aware of that fact. There is a little bit of us being a little hypocritical, because I know some of us have quite a few certs to our names or are pursuing other ones. But I think it's, to Leff's point, the industry's in a weird place now, so it is something we need to discuss. And Murman, you brought it up early. We all do have different opinions on this topic, so I think this will be some healthy conversation. But I want to step off of one of the remarks Andrew just made, where he talked about how, sometimes you will see people who just took their CSM but don't have any real experience, or you'll see someone who has a lot of experience on his resume but may not necessarily have a accredited educational certification, which to me, certs just basically show you have the academic experience, you've taken the classes. So at that point, a resume comes across your desk. How do you know that you're getting someone with actual coaching experience? So how do you what are the questions you would ask? And I'm going to start with you, Gifford, so you can warm up. What are the questions you would ask, or what are the hints you would give people to be able to know that you're getting the type of coach that you're looking for? You're not getting for someone who's unnecessarily trying to play up maybe for a higher bill rate when they might not be suited for that role.
It just depends on what I'm interviewing for. I mean, if I'm interviewing for an RTE or versus a coach versus a Scrum Master, but generally the first thing I always kind of go to, like, it's my first question generally out of the box, is I ask, if you had to choose one of the Scrum ceremonies as the most important, which one would you choose? And generally, I'm looking for the retrospective. I mean, it's starting to get back to principle-based agility. And if you give me anything but the retrospective, and then can't give me a decent defending why and your experience around why this was the most important thing at your company. Like, I mean, I've had some compelling arguments where the stand-up was the most important thing in the context of that company, and that's how the person could explain it. But then if you do give me retrospective, and then all you give me is what went well, what didn't go well, and what we should stop doing, or one of those very generic retros as your as a retrospective, then I follow up with, can you give me a couple retrospective techniques and why you would use that particular retro technique in that context? And all you give me is my toolbox is what went well, what didn't go well, and what we should stop doing, or something to that generic effect. Then you're like toast. You're cooked.
Same question, Andrew Leff.
So my interviewing style might be a little different, I guess.
Confrontational?
No, not at all. I actually...
That's his communication style.
I like to feel how comfortable somebody is. I know that's hard to establish on the phone, but on a face-to-face, if we can have a conversation, even on the phone, if within the first 5 minutes we're just talking, it feels very coach-like to me. So I want to know your ability to connect. I want to know your ability to listen. And I want to know the ability that with what you're listening, you're asking questions back. I want to almost gauge the level of curiosity somebody has on the interview, so you can really feel them out as a coach. And maybe it's just my bias because that's the way I coach, but I tend to like to hear through the interview and ask very kind of blank questions or even powerful questions at that point to try and draw some things out. If they're interviewing for a coach, I do make an assumption. I'll ask them about some of principles and practices, how they would approach certain situations. If it's, let's say it's a safe, specific type coach, whether it's at the team level or at the program level, I'd want to know, how many trains they've worked on. So yes, there are some very focused questions around Agile or a framework specific, but I really want to know, and it's hard within an hour. Let's say you block off an hour, just that progression of the conversation. Did I walk away like, wow, that hour went really quick? Or did I walk away thinking, oh my God, that was extremely painful to get through an hour? Probably need someone else to, interview them as well to get their opinion. But I think that's important. And it's funny, something James, Mr. Gifford, had interviewed somebody on, and it's always stuck with me. He asked a question. It was, what was the last book you read? I was like, wow, that's kind of a cool question because no one really expects to get asked that. So I ask questions. I keyed off of something. I asked that question. I also ask what they do in the community outside of their job, not community service type work, but what do they do in the Agile community outside of their job? So I think it's important how they stay connected, not only internally, but how are they learning? Because it can't just be on the job.
That's a good question. That's a powerful question. Chris Murman, same question.
So I suck at this, to be honest, because I think that I've met people without any coaching experience that tell really good stories of transformations. I know project managers that have never written a line of code that know how to take credit for these big projects that they had very little impact on what to do, kind of a thing. Like, I mean, to be honest, so much of coaching is pure luck about what happens. You can give the right answers, you can guide the right way. Even those of us that have been doing it people have been doing it way longer for me. Like the success of them as a coach is so often out of their hands that it's hard to ask a question, in my opinion, that really credentials them in any way. So I guess that's the reason why I guess I like what Drew said, because about how do you get them thinking on their feet, how to think, like, do they have the ability to listen and ask follow-ups for, because that's a really good sign of a coach, is someone that gets curious when a situation arises, right? Like, hey, I'm being placed in this situation. Tell me more. I'd love to find out how better to help this, instead of just launching into whatever book answer that you've given. Because to be honest, that's a lot of these interviews is, if you don't know how to ask the right questions, you're just going to ask book questions and you're going to get book answers. And that favors people that have more letters after that name, because they have all the knowledge in the world, but they don't know how to put it to good use. Right. So I don't know. I really struggle with this question because I don't think I've been asked a ton of great questions, and I don't know what great questions to ask. Because for me, it's like, do I know the person? Do I have history with that person? Do they know someone that used to work with me and they probably looked me up beforehand? And So the interview is kind of a formality. I don't know. I'm rambling. This seems like a very difficult mountain to climb.
Yeah, and before James jumps in, just one thing that you said, Murm, it's interesting. I almost feel that a lot of times during the interview process for air quote coach, they don't understand the organizations don't necessarily understand the role as we do. So the way those job descriptions are written, when you're interviewing, you're like, my goodness, as Cusack likes to say, you've given me a 10-speed bike to win the Indy 500. No one can do that. So that laundry list of things you're asking for, it's like ridiculous. No one, have you read through that description to even understand what half the things you're asking for mean?
So now you got me thinking, Andrew, and you keyed off a question that you saw Gifford ask previously. If you're trying to see how comfortable people are in situations, would we be better served asking non-Agile specific questions to see how people think and how they, like Murman said, I think it was Murman that said, how people problem solve on the fly and how their brains work? Are we better suited when we start interviewing this type of role to get away from the whole, the pillars of lean and the basic tenets of safe and get more towards the ephemeral to get them to think? Is that a better approach?
It could be. I guess it depends on how you execute it. I don't think an hour-long interview, depending upon the coaching position, and honestly, any coaching position is quite long enough, right? I've done more interviewing now that have been 5, 7, 8 interviews over weeks to months, where it's been intense discussions as well as situations. So they have used situational. I even went on a face-to-face interview with a company that literally it was 5 hours, 6 hours long. And I had to run every ceremony in the organization cold, as well as walk through predetermined scenarios with groups of different people, and had to run team retrospectives with a team I'd never been around. So literally it was like an audition. It was insane. So I don't know if I'd want to go to that extreme, to be honest, because it's uncomfortable. We want to see people in uncomfortable positions, but not to the point where it feels artificial.
Yeah, I would definitely agree to that. And I'm in a different, I'm hiring for full-time people. So a lot of times I'm going through behavioral stuff. I'm checking out what you as a person actually value. So if I asked you, give me 3 words to describe your personal values, what would those be? And then you give me those values back, and they're nowhere near where the company's at value wise, then it's going to be tough for me to want to hire you even as a coach, because you're going to be kind of going against the grain of where the company culture is. So it's that whole different paradigm of hiring for a consulting group that's going to run a gig versus I've got to build a team of individuals and coaches for, an enterprise. So, a lot of my stuff is behavioral, situational, value-based. And then I get a little bit into the actual Agile knowledge. And I like to probe where my hot buttons are to see how you react to those, because if how people the book knowledge is important, but how you actually act in a situation. If I tell you that our company normalizes story points and you're fundamentally against that, and now I'm going to have to fight you at every turn because you don't want to, you want to coach to something different because that's the enterprise standard. Those are the kind of things that you got to get into. We all have our things that we touch on as coaches that we, tend to gravitate towards. And I know we all, as a group, kind of align very closely on the way we kind of approach things. In general, we have our disagreements, but for the most part, we align on things. But if you have a coach that's over here in right field with a different mindset, then, what's that going to do your transformation if you're trying to get everybody kind of drumming on the same beat? And so those are the kind.
Can we turn this into a fight about normalizing story points? Because now I want to fight about that. That's what I want to do. Can we forget the rest of this podcast? Can we fight about normalizing story points?
Well, as long as we're normalizing them on 1, 2 effing big, and I have no idea.
No estimates. Let's move on.
Yeah, I hate you. God, I hate you.
So now you guys just made me think. So You're talking about the different types of questions you ask. James just used the terms behavioral, situational, value-based. So say you're interviewing a team level coach, right? And we're going to get into the different strata of coaching. I know we touched on that with the dark side of coaching episode earlier last year, but say you're interviewing a team level coach. How do you know that how can you tell that this person isn't just a scrum master and not someone who's ready to take on the coaching mantle? Because I think we all can agree. We've had this conversation offline that a good scrum master is basically coaching. But how can you tell that, okay, this person is definitely a dyed-in-the-wool scrum master. They haven't yet got the point of got the active coaching and the 4 quadrants and all that, versus someone you can interview and say, okay, this person definitely has the chops that they can actually coach as opposed to scrum mastering and stewarding a team. And I'm going to start with you, Gifford, because I know you've done a lot of hiring as of late in your current role. Is there a way, or is there a cheat that you've known, like a cheat code you could say, okay, this person is definitely a scrum master and that's what they want to do, or this person's a scrum master who's trying to get into the coaching world and they definitely would be a good fit?
Well, there's cats fighting at your house, so
yeah, sorry about that.
Yeah, generally we don't hire team level coaches. We hire very experienced scrum masters. We're not, at my engagement, actually it's not an engagement. The company I work for, we don't hire team level coaches. We hire senior level scrum masters or people. We expect them to still run a team and then coach other teams. We don't, we have one. They coach one. They're responsible for one team. And then they provide coaching support. So and that's all based on the notion of our career ladder. But so when I'm looking for that scrum master, I'm looking for somebody that that understands like the Tuckman model and the storming, norming, forming. I got it all wrong, the teams go through Shuhari and the fact that that's there and understanding how getting people to kind of move through that progression to actually become a team. And they're talking about the team's dynamics. They're maybe looking at, flow-based metrics and understanding, and kind of coaxing the team along to find those bottlenecks and things like that. They're literally kind of working with the teams to point out, using information or other methods of where they're kind of lacking. And we look for people with those types of analytic skills, and then that have really deep Scrum Master experience, and that's who we hire as our team level coaches. I get very frustrated by you got the program coach, you got the team coach, you got the enterprise coach, you got the Scrum Master coach, you got the blah 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 blah. You got so many the dark. You get there's so many 18 different flavors of coaching. It's like the Scrum Master is a coach, and if I've got a senior Scrum Master, he or she should be able to handle anything that comes with the team. And then we have essentially what's known as a site coach, which is they're looking at the value stream, they're working with the functional management, they're keeping connected with the enterprise and where the transformation's going, and they support the person, that senior level Scrum Master, at the team level, kind of keeping things going. So we have a very, very flat idea around what coaching is in our organization. And I prefer it that way. I don't need the minutia. I don't want people that want titles. I want somebody that realizes that, hey, a Scrum Master is a coach. And, if I'm going to, and then to progress past that, it's actually more about the value stream and getting people focused more on the values and principles of Agile as opposed to the practices. But when I'm hiring that team level coach, I need them to be really focused on, I want people to act their way to new thinking. I mean, it's David Marquet's whole thing with intent-based leadership, and I've just grabbed onto it. And that's how we run my shop, or that's how we run the shop.
Murman, what are your thoughts?
Huh? I'm sorry. I dozed off there for a few minutes. That's like Gifford. That was a soliloquy, for the ages. Well done. I've not heard you speak for that long before. That was impressive.
James Smash.
Yeah. I'll make it real simple. If they've been a Scrum Master for a couple years, they're a coach. I don't think that. I think there's very little difference between if they've been a scrum master on one team for 6 months, they're probably they haven't been exposed enough situations. But if they've run several teams and can describe what the different teams are like, just throw them out there. I don't think any of the rest of that stuff matters. It doesn't mean that I think that James is wrong. I just don't overthink it.
Fair enough. Andrew.
Yeah, so I want to know their approach. I want to know what week 1 looks like. I want to know what 30 days looks like. And I might be revealing some cards here, but I want them to tell me their crash and burns without me asking. Like literally, I want them to showcase the fact that they walked into a team and tried to, assert something or do something, and it was like mutiny. And I want to hear about those crash and burns, and I want them to like be proud of them in a way. So that whole fail forward mentality where, hey, I walked in here and I lit the place on fire and failed miserably. And, so I learned from that. So I want to hear how they're learning, how they're observing, how they're listening, and what their approach is when approaching, whether it be a team, an organization, a program, a leadership group, whomever they're coaching. I really want to understand what to walk me through the first 30 days or even walk me through the first day. I want to hear a lot of that progression. To me, hear a lot of that conversation. That really, to me, speaks to how their coaching approach is and how well thought it is.
That's an interesting way to look at it, to have them explain to you what would they do going in that first day, that first week, that first month. And to your point about, I want to hear a story where you brought in a new idea, were crucified for it. I think that's a very powerful point, because if you think about it, whenever I tell my story in my resume at an interview, I always bring up the places where I ate it and how I learned from it and how that made me a better employee. So it deals with the whole thing about being comfortable with failure and learning and all that sort of stuff. That's a pretty powerful point. And you said something before, or maybe Murman brought it up about the different modes that a coach goes into. And I want to ask a question to the three of you. So,
hey, wait, Jay, before you do that, actually, can I ask a follow-up question since we just talked about interview questions?
Sure.
Because this is a legit, I'm curious question. I don't know the right answer to this. So we all just talked about asking questions. Some of them have right or wrong answers. Some of it is just more of a process. We want to know how they think. Like, so what do you all do when you hear, and this doesn't even have to apply to a candidate, right? But for the most part, within the sense of a candidate, when you talk to someone, you ask them a question and you hear an answer that's different than what you would have given. Like I'm legit serious about this, because Drew's heard me going on about this before, but we're an uppity bunch of MFers in this community. We love telling people when they're right or wrong. We love knowing the right answers. We talk about not wanting to give book answers, but we have all the book answers memorized. Is it possible to hear an answer that may be different than the one you have given and the coach candidate still be valid? Does that make sense what I'm asking?
Yes. And yes. Yeah, I would say absolutely. I love hearing an approach. I was like, that just knocked me off my seat. Like literally, wow, I want to try that. I mean, I find interviews to be, inspirational at times where I'm like, wow, I never even thought about that. So again, I think it's great. It's great to meet. It's a great way to network and meet people, as well as, get to hear different approaches to where you thought you were right. And that's another, interviewing tip is if they're so steadfast on what they think is right, and that's the only answer, that to me is a red flag. So, we want to, I hate pragmatic, but we want people that are not Agile Bible beaters, that are, not just so conformed to doing it one single way, but are open to learning multiple ways of approaching the same problem.
But I would even say, hold on a second, Murph, if you don't mind. But I would even say, so if I ask you, we'll use Gifford's example. If I say, okay, Drew, what do you think is the most important ceremony that a Scrum Master will run on a daily, weekly, monthly basis, right? And I have a preconceived notion in my mind that I think it's the retrospective. And you come at me and you tell me it's the demo. And you're real passionate, right? The first thing I'm going to think to myself is, that's not what I would have picked. Let's explore that. And if you get real passionate, you're telling me, I think it's a demo because I really want to make sure that we're delivering the right value to our stakeholders, right? And you start like, I see the fire coming, in your opinion, and I see you like defending your opinion, and that's why you really think that. To me, I'm like, oh, okay, I would probably remember the candidate that has an answer different than mine, and that can say, well, here's what I think, as opposed to if you just said the retro, I just would have went, oh, okay, check that box, move along. I mean, that's just what I would have heard. To answer your question, Murman, if you give me an answer that I wasn't expecting, and then I want to unpack that, I want to peel it. And if we start digging in, that's how you reveal inadvertently how you're thinking. And I find that more fascinating than if you just give me all the answers I was expecting. That's not that I'm saying you want to give the wrong answer and defend yourself. I don't know if that's a good approach, but I think if you give an answer that's a little off kilter, and then you can effectively state why, to me, that's an interview that's memorable, and that's a candidate that I would probably end up bringing back.
Yeah, I like that you said that, Jay, and Giff, I'd love to hear what you think as well. But I think that honestly, I think sometimes these people that are interviewing, they're people that are just like us. Like they run teams a certain way. They've seen some things succeed and some things not succeed. And again, a lot of that could be, they weren't run very well, they weren't coached the right way, or they weren't given the right practices or whatnot. Or it could just be this is like dumb luck. And so I gave Gifford shit about the whole normalizing story points kind of a thing, but like little things like that, companies are trying to normalize the way their teams are run, like across the board. They're just like baby birds looking at you going, just tell us the thing to do and then we'll do it. When in reality, if we do the same thing with hiring coaches, if we just say, I want people that answer the questions the way I would answer it, the way that they think, the way that I would think, all you're going to hire is a bunch of people that are just like you, and you're a flawed person that doesn't always know what to do and handle situations, and you're going to have a team of people that's just like you, when you should have a diverse team that like balances each other out and helps.
You're hitting on, and I know I go back to this, and I'm sure the listeners are probably sick of hearing me saying it. Dave Snowden talked about that when Andy Clef interviewed him, where he talked about his statement was, you want coherence, not conformance. And I think you're right, Murman. You want to avoid that everybody gives the same answer. It's the retro. But you want the coherence of at least everybody's thinking along the same lines. I think you're spot on. But Gifford, we cut you off. What was your response to Murman's question?
No, I mean, if somebody comes back with a different answer, I definitely want to pick at it like a big scab. But I definitely need, I need them to come back and support it and tell a story of why that was successful in that context. So I can at least get the context of it, because we all have our own biases, and I try to shed mine as much as humanly possible. But, I do get, we all get trapped in our biased positions. So if you can come back and tell me why that is and actually have a valuable story about why that was and give me the actual context behind it, I'm willing to engage on that, because getting somebody else's context of a situation and where a practice worked, I'm going to run into that context eventually at some point in my journey. And that's just another toolbox, another item in the thing. If you give me the book answer and we're going to disagree on it, that's one thing. But if you can give me the book answer and then give me the context of where and why and the situations that you applied that then is something that I can grab onto and take in and contextualize and learn from. But if you're just going to give me the book answer and we're going to disagree on the book answer, that's what it's going to be. But if you can actually give me valuable information to kind of give me the context behind it, I'm going to latch on and we're going to have a conversation about it.
So to bootstrap on the whole concept of Leff talked about pragmatism, and Gifford, you were just talking about the book answer. So most of us have taken Lisa Adkins' ICA Agile course, right? Agile, there's mentoring, there's coaching, there's facilitation, there's instructors, right? Instructing. And a bit of a personal confession, I realized that I am a much better instructor probably than I am a coach. I really enjoy the act of instruction more than anything, right? However, and I think we all agree upon this, we have come across a fair amount of people who build themselves as Agile coaches, which are really best suited to be just instructors, right? So my question is, how do you, is there a way to differentiate the two? Because I mean, there is a definitive difference between someone who can coach and someone who can instruct. And I'm curious to see if you guys have come across a situation where you said, okay, well, this person is definitely a better instructor, and I need a heavier coaching presence, not an instructing presence. What are your thoughts on that? Or am I completely off base?
So I'm going to jump in because this builds on something I want to say. Sorry, Jay, I know you usually cue people up, but I think that's hard to flush out in an interview. But I will say that one of the questions that I like to ask is, how do you build trust, right? If you're working with a team or an organization, how do you build what's your approach to building trust? And if people struggle with that answer or struggle with the question, because it's like, well, what do you mean? And I want to hear the approach around, what do you do when you approach a team and you're a coach walking in and you know what, it's uncomfortable. So maybe they've had coaches, maybe they haven't. So how do you set it up to start building trust, to start building that teamwork? And I think when you're just used to instructing, to build the trust in the classroom is a different approach than building trust within a team. So I could be getting a lot of flaming.
Well, I mean, did you get permission to coach, Andrew? That's another hotbed topic for another day.
But I'm curious. Tell me if I'm way off base here by being able to thinking in that. Anyone feel free to jump in on that one.
I will. So I'll go. Gifford, I'll make sure I swing to you. I do think there's a difference. You're right. Left between getting the trust in the classroom or the instructional setting versus getting a trust day in and day out in the trench with a team. Now you got me thinking, and I know most of us are probably quiet because as we're bouncing questions off each other, we're trying to put through in our own heads how we would answer in that interview. And I do think that's a good question. How do you build trust with a team? How do you build trust with an organization? I do think there's a difference between an instructor, and I'm repeating myself, between an instructor level type course where I'm teaching it versus where I'm in the trench with the team. But I do think that's probably a really good question to ask.
James, I'll kick it over to you. But the way we might want to ask that question is, what are your stances as a coach? How are you able to navigate being an instructor versus being a mentor versus being a coach? How do you walk through those, different stances in an organization or in the atmosphere that you're in, or environment rather? Atmosphere, listen to me. I'm in space. Literally, how do you walk through that? And it could all happen in the same day, in the same hour, in the same moment, whatever it might be. How do you present yourself in those different ways?
And I kind of, just to piggyback on Andrew, if you're talking about me, I find myself stuck between mentor and instructor more than I ever find myself as an actual coach. That yet I'm supposed to be a coach, but most of my experience that I'm giving to teams is my bloody knuckles of me hitting the wall and skinning, snapping a wrench off and banging my hand into some random part of the engine. It's scars, and it's me teaching the team through my scars and stories versus actually coaching them through situations. And it does get into the coaching stances. And, me personally, I end up more an instructor and mentor versus actual coach. And so
I thought you had a belt. I thought that was what you brought, was the belt.
Well, I do have the Scramando belt. I mean, but
wear the belt. Do you not wear the belt anymore?
I wear the belt, but that's how you build trust with the teams, because nothing says we can trust this guy, then he's willing to show up in yellow camis wearing a utility belt with Post-it notes on it. Well, they either think this guy just has no F's giving and he's going to be a hoot, and that's just a way to break through the barriers of, like, either this guy's such an idiot, we need to make fun of him until and that's one of the ways in, because I'm creating a low barrier of entry. And if you're and it comes back to, like, how approachable you are, and that's making yourself vulnerable is, like, one of the key foundations to earning a team's trust. or even an organization's trust is making sure that you're vulnerable. So showing up and not being the stuffy guy in the room sometimes is my gate, my way in. Me showing up to a meeting with the executives wearing the Scramando belt, it doesn't go over so well. But me showing up no, it doesn't. They I got massacred. But
would have never thought that.
You show up to a meeting with a bunch of product owners, and it's big room, a big room style planning, and you're busting Post-it notes off your hip like it's going out of style. There's respect in the room.
Is there?
Yes.
I can see that. No, I can see that. I can definitely see that. But now I'm wondering if I should use my.
No. This is an open invitation. Gifford, you get $5 for a legit person that was on one of your teams. Like for every single, I will wire you the money. Send me an email or tweet me at Chris Murman. If you were on one of Gifford's teams and you respected him for showing up with that belt, I will send Gifford $5 for every one of those times. That's an open offer from now through the end of time, and you can prove you did it.
That's a good challenge.
And whoever does that, we will split the money at the bar. So crush Chris Murman.
Now I'm trying to wonder if I gained any trust showing up with those cowboy boots I have with the giant flames on them. Did those help?
No, it was when you were doing shots at your desk. That's when you earned my trust.
Yeah.
During stand-ups.
Never gonna let that down. So I think we've covered off a big chunk of the agenda. So I just want to ask one or two more things. So Leff talked about how one of his big questions is around trust and how you build trust with a team. And Gifford was exposed with one of his lead-in questions. What's the last book you read? Murman, when you're doing an interview, what is probably your favorite question to ask, or one of those questions that gets people thinking and is very telling without being overly prescriptive? Do you have any go-to questions you ask?
Well, you got to remember, I've never been the one actually doing the interviewing.
That's right.
But I will say something that I enjoy is, when someone, I think any kind of softball question that has to do with frameworks that kind of gets me to kind of share like, hey, these are the things that I enjoy about certain frameworks and don't, and these are the things that I find challenging in them. This is what I find difficult instructing or coaching around, because I think that if a coach is willing to say, hey, I think I'm pretty good at this and I like doing this, and I struggle here because philosophically I struggle with how to do that, at least I'm admitting to the person, like, I don't think any of this is an ivory tower. I don't think this is none of this is all of this is something that is fungible, that is like all of like frameworks are decomposing faster than we can create them, kind of a thing, right? So the more we can just get away from thinking that a framework is perfect, and more of like, well, how do we turn this into a conversation about helping teams get better? That's what I'm interested in. So any question that involves that, then I'm down for.
All right, no, it was a good answer, gentlemen. We're approaching time, so I want to go around the horn. Final thoughts: how to hire an Agile coach, interviewing tips, tricks, anything. And I'm gonna just feel free to throw it out there. And I'm gonna start with you, Gifford.
Oh, be patient. Don't just hire the first guy you find just because you have to hire them. Be thorough. There are a lot of imposters. I can tell you that I faked it till I made it. And
look at you now.
Look at me now. You gotta. You have to. I've interviewed 50 so-called coaches this year, and around 200 Scrum Masters. That just they look good on paper. But when the rubber meets the road, they're not worth three cents. You be prepared to be, interviewing in volume to find the right person to fit your organization or what your needs are.
It's good. It's good advice. Good advice. Andrew Leff.
I think just be open to having a really good conversation and being open to listening really well and also understanding where the candidate's coming from. So, it's nerve-wracking if you don't interview a lot. It can be, nerves can get the best of you. So make it comfortable, make it inviting, make it a warm discussion. Also, I really do like the off-color questions. That's why I like the book question, and even, hey, what'd you have for dinner last night? It's literally just, whoa, I wasn't expecting that. So how do you rattle the brain a little bit to get them off kilter, to get them to walk you through scenarios in a more comfortable or different way? So I think, again, it's truly the art of the conversation. That's where my interviewing passions lie. So I definitely enjoy an interview that is not, well, tell me the past 5 years of your life and tell me how you got to be a coach and more along the lines of, deep conversation and walk me through a situation where, you want to share with me at the moment, the first one that pops into your head, and it could be anything. So, or I even like, and this is the last thing, I know we're running long, I would love for a coach. I had one person do this and I thought it was great. They kicked off the interview with an icebreaker. The candidate did. So I really like that. I was like, wow, that takes some guts, right? Like, I want people to provoke me on an interview. So I want it to be memorable. And you said it, Jay. You want to remember the candidate. And if that's a way to do that, like the icebreaker, I will never forget that person ever.
Off-color interview, meaning you want to get them to say the word fuck as soon as possible in an interview?
I did not say that, no.
That's what I heard.
Generally when you ask people what, you come in there with what's your greatest failure and what did you learn from it? Generally that's like, one of those poop your pants moments in an interview.
Yeah, but I want them to offer that up without me asking for it. Like, that's where I want it to go. Like, I literally want them just to go out with it. Like, literally go in and say, yep, I sunk the Titanic with this one. I moved the iceberg with my own hands,
Oh my God.
I have a coworker who swears the best interview question he's ever heard is the person walked in and sat down and the interviewer said, "Tell me your best drinking story." And do you want to talk about a way to offset? Murman, you talk about off color. You want to talk about getting someone on their heels real quickly and get them going. That'd be pretty interesting. So, out of morbid curiosity, Leff, I know we're running long.
Hired if he got asked that question.
Not a chance. Leff, what was the icebreaker that they used? Do you remember?
So I'm going to mutilate it because it just literally popped into my brain, but it was something that they were able to do on the phone. I'll have to remember the question. I'll post it in the site as a follow-up to the podcast. It's not clicking in my head. I remember it all the time, except of course for right now.
Cool. Please do. I think people will want to hear that. Chris Murman, final thoughts.
I love Drew and Gifford, but they've just made me want to come through the computer at them several times. I think that honestly, if you want, don't be afraid to engage in the social networks of the community. I think that the most important thing is, who do you know that's worked with them before, that's had conversations with them before, that knows them, their mindset in any way. I think that I've been thankful enough to meet people in the community that have vouched for me and spoken up for me. I do the same thing for people that I know and love and care for. I would recommend most of the people on our board in a heartbeat. And the others, I don't know them well enough to know whether I would or wouldn't, right? But I just think that that's what our networks are for. So, use the community. Let's police each other, right? Let's find good ones and keep getting them in front of good teams that need help.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure they're called references.
That's not what I mean. A reference is not that, right? There's a difference between a reference and, just to be honest, I've not had to interview for the last couple of jobs I've gotten, just because I knew people that were like, "Hey, come work at my company. You're in."
Yeah, so I totally agree with you. Our network, it's a small gene pool. So literally IT, I feel like, is even just smaller these days. But that being said, of course, I mean, we always want to always stay close and connected. That's why, you don't burn bridges, right? So,
Yeah.
But that being said, if you are interviewing though, or companies, hey, PSA, spend some time, invest in understanding how a coach approaches your organization, what you truly want out of a coach, not just boilerplate, scrum master with some coaching verbiage in it. So
that assumes that they know what to look for, which is a whole nother topic in and of itself. We probably didn't even touch upon that.
Yeah, I don't think that's a whole nother episode for a whole nother day. Somebody make that note.
Write that down.
I'll add it to the show notes. But again, thanks. I know we ran a little bit long, guys, so thank you very, very much for your time. For our listeners, thanks again for listening. If you enjoyed the episode, please give us a review, rating, leave a comment on iTunes, Stitcher, your podcasting platform of choice. We do appreciate it. This conversation will continue on the coalition.agileuprising.com. We will have a thread for this episode, so please hop in and tell us what your thoughts are on interviewing for coaches, interviewing for scrum masters, what you like to go through, what you don't like to go through when you are on the other side of the desk. We'd love to hear more from you. If this is your first time tuning into us, please feel free to subscribe to the podcast. And last but not least, we do have a Patreon out there. It's patreon.com/AgileUprising. If you feel the need and would like to donate, please do so. If not, our content will always remain free. That's what we strive for. We want to be part of the community. So again, on behalf of Andrew, Chris, James, and myself, I want to thank all of you listening. And good night, and we will see you next episode.
I'm only happy when it rains. I'm only happy when it's complicated. And though I know you can appreciate it,